Greetings to my friends and colleagues as we start this discussion of trending topics in supervision. I'm Dorinda Noble, and I'm really honored that you're taking time to be with me. Today, we're going to talk about trauma-informed supervision, cultural humility in supervision, and online supervision boundaries. I'm doing this in connection with NASW Texas, and I certainly thank them for their cooperation in trying to make this information available to you. I love to talk about supervision. I started out my career in child welfare, but spent most of my adult years in education for social workers, training the next generations of social workers and social work supervisors. I taught at LSU, Go Tigers, where I was appointed by two different governors to the Louisiana State Board of Social Work Examiners. Then I moved to Texas and joined the faculty of the School of Social Work at Texas State University, which I directed for about 13 years. There, I was also appointed by Governor Perry to the Texas Board of Social Worker Examiners. So I've been very involved with regulation of social work for at least 20 years. During that time, I have become very active in the Association of Social Work Boards, which is that organization that oversees and owns our licensing tests. I served as president of the board of ASWB. So as we talk about some of these things, keep in mind that I'm coming from a position where I've heard many hearings involving social workers who are having problems, and I want to help us avoid that. Many times I have watched these hearings and said, oh, if that person had had better supervision, it would probably, they wouldn't be here in front of me. So I believe in the efficacy of supervision, and I want us to do a good job of supervision. If you can't see me, I have silver hair and beige skin, and I am some kind of drop dead beautiful, I'm sure. And we are running this with closed captions, so if you need that service, we're glad to provide it for you. Well, let's get started. I want you to meet my dog, Elvis Presley. He ain't nothing but a hound dog, but he really wants to welcome you to this event so that you can participate and enjoy. Let's start with a case. Let me explain this case to you because we live in a time where trauma seems to be ever present, and it shapes our lives and our careers. In this case, Linda, LMSW, is employed with an agency that serves troubled teens. One day, her agency supervisor, Josie, instructs her to quickly climb into the ambulance with a client, Rochelle, age 17, who is being transported to the hospital. Since the agency has temporary custody of Rochelle, and because Rochelle is highly agitated, the ambulance allows Linda to accompany the teen. Linda feels worried even though she's carefully masked and gloved and in protective clothing. In the ambulance, she smells blood and urine and sweat. It appears that Rochelle is under the influence of drugs. Her behavior is erratic and her comments are confused. But Linda finally gets the story that Rochelle was forced to spend the weekend in captivity, where several males sexually assaulted her and plied her with drugs. Rochelle finally was able to get away and make it to the agency. At the hospital, Linda sees that medical personnel seem reluctant to treat Rochelle. Police officers declined to file a report because they believe Rochelle doesn't make much sense and can't supply any information on the alleged perpetrators. And besides, the girl probably brought it on herself, don't you know? The hospital social worker thinks it would be useless to contact child welfare since the client is 17 and has a history of sexual encounters. Linda feels overwhelmed and out of control. Before long, however, Rochelle runs away from the hospital too. So Linda returns to the agency office. Josie, her supervisor, acknowledges her, but asks nothing about how the hospital run turned out. Linda feels abandoned and senses that it would not be wise to bring up with Josie the trouble that she has seen. It seems to Linda that Josie doesn't really want to talk about it. When Josie finally asks Linda about what happened, Linda answers briefly and says nothing about her feelings in the situation. The supervisor doesn't bring it up again for weeks. Linda's colleagues, however, see that Linda is troubled and depressed. When they ask her about it, Linda says she has a headache, and no one questions her any further. But her colleagues feel a vague sense of trouble and unfinished business. They leave work downhearted. So much of what we do involves trauma. In social work, that's par for the course for us, not only to our clients, but trauma to ourselves as social workers. When we feel traumatized by listening to and seeing our clients' struggles, we are experiencing vicarious trauma. Over the past 40 years, interest in trauma has grown and its impact has exploded on professions in mental health, both in practice and in research. Clients who have been through war, disasters, interpersonal violence, substance abuse, psychotic episodes, and other trauma have clearly suffered life-changing outcomes from that trauma. These effects can be magnified if the individual has mental illness, a history of abuse, or a background of substance abuse. And trauma can be catching too. In other words, the strong emotional response to trauma may transfer to people who work with the trauma victims or with the social worker. Now, it's really difficult to aim for empathy while we're still trying to take care of ourselves. Clients who have been through trauma really need us to be disciplined in our response to them. Developing empathy requires discipline. You have to develop interactive, flexible ways of responding in order to enter another person's world, which is what empathy is. To feel empathy, we must be secure in our own identities and our abilities to handle our personal reactions. We can't let sympathy overwhelm us. We know that sympathy is different from empathy. Sympathy is pretty much centered in us and how we feel about the other person's troubles. But empathy is trying to feel like the other person. So let's talk about what we can do on building the discipline that empathy requires. Actually, empathy can have a pretty dark side. The very quality that makes us effective at understanding others makes us vulnerable to being traumatized. We can suffer along with the client. Distress can be contagious. New professionals are the most vulnerable to being traumatized. When the professional becomes traumatized, it can result in deeper insight and compassion, but it may also increase shame, fear, anger, and depression, as if the client's upsetting experiences happened to us. When the social worker experiences symptoms of vicarious traumatization, the professional must exhibit attitudes or behaviors that do not raise ethical concerns about boundaries, impairment, or competence. In other words, we've got to maintain the discipline to not take care of our sorrow for the client through drugs or alcohol or other kinds of impairment. We have to maintain our competence and maintain our boundaries. When we don't, it affects our own mental health and our family relationships, and certainly our job satisfaction. Well, what helps us to regulate our emotional responses to another person's pain? We have to be aware of our responses and our feelings. Acknowledge them. Seek a balance between life and work, and that's, of course, much easier to say than to do. We're all very busy, and it's tough to take care of ourselves sometimes. We have to take care of our physical and emotional needs in healthy ways. We avoid self-medicating, addictive gambling, other things that will create ultimate problems for us. Use positive support systems. In other words, make sure you surround yourself with professionals that you know and trust, that you can confide in, and that they can help you. If necessary, get medical or mental health treatment. Develop creative outlets for expressing feelings through music. I'm wearing my musical staff today to help me hang on to the beauty and the serenity of beautiful music. Art, writing, other creative activities, knitting, whatever it may be that turns you on, then make sure that you're giving yourself time to do that. Develop a ritual to end your day. Sometimes people make a ritual of putting all the case material away. And as you do, you go through a mental process of saying, I'm not taking that home with me. I'm going to go home and live fully. So think about ways that you can really leave the job in the office. Well, let's talk about the ways we respond to trauma. It helps a lot to use strength-based, solution-focused strategies in supervision. So use positive speech. For instance, this case would be challenging for anyone. That tells the supervisee that you care and you're indicating that you think they've done a good job. Or a statement like, how did you manage to get so far with this difficult case? Second, imply advice. rather than give advice. What do you suppose might happen if you yada yada and let them think creatively? What would happen if I took a certain action? Or it might be helpful for you to think of something different, think creatively. In other words, you give the supervisee a chance to think through it. Focus advice on the client rather than the professional. It sounds like this client needs to, so on and so on. Or perhaps the client would benefit by so on and so on. So that you put the focus on the client rather than on the supervisee. Now, Linda was a helper who was shaken by the trauma of her client. In fact, she was bumfuzzled by how the situation played out, feeling as if she was the only one who cared about Rochelle. If ever there was a social worker who needed strong but sensitive supervision, it was Linda. But what she got instead was ignored. Linda was feeling vicarious or secondary traumatization. That's the way that we respond as helping professionals to stressful events. It unfolds over time and it results in personal, psychological, physical, spiritual challenges in the professional. It reflects that the professional cares and feels committed to helping. But sometimes the professional's not really able to help very much because they're in a deep state of traumatization about what has happened. They may have real emotional upheaval about the client's or client group situation. This may emerge from the professional's past life experiences, and it can affect relationships with clients, co-workers, and loved ones. And it's often signaled when the professional has trouble managing emotions or making good decisions, has problems in relationships, and feels disconnected from others, suffers from physical pain, feels vulnerable, loses trust in the other, and has low self-esteem, and could even ultimately lose hope and meaning in life. I think we see this in dramatic cases such as terrible hurricanes, natural disasters, where helpers become overwhelmed by the horror of what they're seeing. So, what can Josie do to alleviate harm in this situation? Let's look at some responses. We want to realize that trauma-informed care is a journey. It's not a destination. It's a journey. And it's not trauma therapy. Being informed by the trauma and responding to the trauma means that we focus on the service, not on the trauma itself and its aftermath, but on the multifaceted concerns of the client or the supervisee and how present day issues may be linked to the trauma itself. Now, Josie recognized that she had shied away from talking to Linda because Josie herself was in a serious accident some years before. The ride to the hospital by ambulance was traumatic to her, and Josie has avoided dwelling on ambulance transport since. One of the reasons that Josie advocated with the ambulance crew to allow Linda on the vehicle was that Josie felt so abandoned and alone on the ambulance ride she took when she was a victim. So she began to study more about trauma-informed supervision. On the one hand, some clients or supervisees seek assistance to address their responses to traumatic experiences, such as surviving a plane crash or some disaster. In contrast, however, it is more common for clients to seek or be required to seek treatment for current problems in living that reflect and stem from past trauma. Trauma-informed practice requires that clinicians recognize the impact that their work has on them personally and professionally, and be proactive in caring for themselves. There's really a notable dearth of literature available to guide supervisors in using trauma-informed supervision, but it's all rolled up in the ability to be sensitive to the implication of the supervisee's history that trauma has for them and for those with whom they work. One thing that Josie learned in her study is that vulnerability is not weakness. Rather, it is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. This prompted Josie to look at how she had handled the trauma of a serious car wreck and her consequent injuries. She realized that she was still going through the process of dealing with those events. While she and Linda were at different stages of professional growth, it struck her that both she and Josie were still growing. So trauma-informed supervision calls upon us to look at the stages of professional growth of both the supervisor and the supervisee. We have to be turning the camera on ourselves at times as the supervisor. A quick guide to this is that we first see social workers in stage one, where they experience a lot of intense emotions. Early in her tenure in the profession and in the position, a mental health professional will experience intense conflicting emotion. She often feels high hopes and excitement about succeeding in this career. Sometimes she feels anxiety about her ability to perform in this career. She may be overwhelmed by learning new tasks and job demands. She may feel confused by the complex needs of the clients or the client group. And she relies heavily on rules because she needs the structure. She doesn't know how to be intuitive at this point about the job. The supervisor, recognizing that the supervisee is most open to new learning at this point, should give a good bit of feedback, specific instruction, and structure. Provide the professional with lots of information about context, the nature of the work, community resources, agency functions, and so forth. Guide the supervisee to reflect on how practice rules can apply to different situations. Accept the mental health professional's high emotional state and allow her to discuss it freely. Reassure the professional that this stage is normal. Everybody goes through it. Tell the professional when she has performed well and when she has made mistakes. If you see it, say it. Tell the professional when she has performed well and have high expectations for the professional's ultimate ability to perform. Give significant guidance on appropriate professional boundaries. The second stage of professional development is when reality sets in. And I suspect if you're like me, you can think back to your own professional career and you have some times when reality set in and it was no longer you being Superman or Superwoman going out to solve the problems of the world, but you were really struggling with reality. When the social worker has some experience under his belt, he sees a more realistic picture of the job in his own capacity. He feels more confident about his abilities to handle the job, though he's still anxious about the work. He may question whether this is the job or even the career for him. He may have difficulty organizing complex case material, don't we all? Deciding on priorities, handling challenging events, and he still seeks rules to organize case interactions rather than responding flexibly to complex situations. The supervisor should reinforce the strengths and encourage the supervisee to experiment with strategies and techniques. Allow the supervisee to make mistakes and help them learn from those mistakes. We actually usually learn a lot more from making mistakes than we do from being successful. So it's a great learning experience. Help the supervisee to distinguish priorities in different situations. Encourage the supervisee to draw on basic knowledge that he already has. Develop some alternative actions. Think creatively. Trust his intuitions. Let go of preconceptions and identify patterns in the case. Model different approaches to handling practice situations and build a sense of belonging to the professional unit. We get to stage 3 then, which is finding the rhythm. At this stage, the mental health professional has begun to find her own rhythm in her work. She probably feels a fair amount of confidence. She enjoys some satisfaction and validation that her work has the desired impact on clients. She's frustrated that there are structural, societal, and personal obstacles that block change in the client's life. She becomes more proficient in developing plans in various different situations. She may become kind of rigid about making rules around practice, particularly if she's worried about taking risks. And she believes she needs more specialized skills and sets more personal goals for professional growth and change. The supervisor is well advised to be a careful, sensitive listener and help the supervisee clarify issues and needs. Recognize that the supervisee's resistance is normal and address the resistance directly. Help the supervisee identify when she is avoiding difficult client behaviors and problems, and model reflective ways of assessing practice situations and strategies. Encourage the supervisee to examine options, develop innovative approaches, and try new techniques. Model case analysis rather than relying on set rules applied without regard for case complexities. We all know every case is different. Make sure that the supervisee is measuring her performance by the behavioral objectives that you have set with the supervisee. Finally, we reach stage 4, playing solo. That is one of the contradictions of supervision. We want the supervisee to depend on us and learn from us, and yet we're preparing them to be independent from us. Though no mental health professional is ever completely autonomous, Hopefully, he does reach the stage of independent, competent work where he feels competent about his skills and knowledge and his ability to make decisions. He replaces rules with flexible responses to practice context, situations, and strategies. He feels independent in his work, and in fact, he may feel restricted if you start giving him intense supervision on a situation. He is vulnerable to feeling isolated and abandoned if he's not supervised at all, however. He has developed some specialized knowledge, and he feels stagnant and bored if he doesn't have the opportunity to learn more and to grow professionally. The supervisor at this point should be alert to opportunities to help this professional reflect, grow, and develop through new challenges. Model how to reflect while acting rather than reflecting on past actions. Help the supervisee transfer knowledge and experience to situations that are unfamiliar to him. Validate the professional's strengths and encourage the professional to moderate and monitor his knowledge and skills and be open to new learning. Encourage the professional to take leadership in the profession and in the workplace. That's a quick overview of how we go through professional development. And while it doesn't happen in the same order with everybody, I mean, we all go back and forth in learning. We learn a lot and then we plateau, or we retreat from learning. So it isn't that this is always going to be formulaic. It is really a matter of different people growing and developing. But in general, you want the supervisee to reach that time when he feels comfortable playing solo. Besides acknowledging growth and development, the trauma-informed supervisor also looks at the professional's safety, both physical and mental. The supervisor emphasizes respect, transparency, and support in dealing with the supervisee. Now, the trauma-informed supervisor makes some assumptions about people. She assumes that people are doing the best they can and assumes everyone has strengths. Assume that troublesome symptoms are always adaptations. Assume that trauma shapes supervisors' attitudes. Assume that trauma is experienced personally and uniquely. Assume that by understanding adaptations and attitudes around trauma, people can manage their symptoms and responses. And finally, assume that that professional needs support. I think back to my days as a child welfare worker, which was daily trauma with cases. And people responded differently to that trauma. Some were just forged ahead no matter what. And I don't know where they stuck their feelings, but it wasn't on display. And others, like me, tended to have real vicarious trauma. So you have to, as a trauma-informed supervisor, look at your supervisees as individuals with individuals' ways of responding. Well, when Josie familiarized herself with trauma-informed supervision, she recognized how important it was to have mutual accountability through a relationship. Having trust and honest communication is critical. So Josie saw that she must have consistent meeting times with her supervisees, and she must update them on performance standards, policies, and changes. She should use inclusive speech, use we, not you. We're in this together. Study how to resolve conflicts, believe in people, and distinguish between observation and judgment. I want to really hammer on this last one. There's a great deal of difference between observing and judging. We don't need to judge our supervisees. We do need to observe and to help them learn about their own behavior and their own feelings. So Josie met with Linda. Josie started by saying that she had made mistakes in her handling of Rochelle's ambulance trip. To begin with, Josie acknowledged she should have talked to Linda about what Josie wanted Linda to accomplish by going to the hospital with Rochelle, instead of throwing her into the swimming pool with no waiters, no directions. As Josie continued, she certainly should have talked to Linda about the experience when Linda returned. Josie admitted that she had acted in response to her trauma about the accident she had long ago, which played through her resistance to talking with Linda. She further apologized for having left Linda to struggle through this bad situation by herself. The apology is an important thing. It's honest communication, it's transparent communication, and it's respectful to apologize when you have fouled up. Linda was pretty amazed by this level of honesty. It made her feel even more comfortable talking to Josie about how powerless and even confused she felt about the experience with Rochelle. She sensed that Josie was really listening to her and not judging her. Josie asked if Linda would be willing to talk about her experience with Rochelle in group supervision, with Josie repeating what she had told Linda privately. Linda agreed to this plan. In fact, Linda said to Josie that co-workers had been concerned about what they sensed as cross purposes between Linda and Josie over this situation. And they might really be relieved to know what was motivating the action in that situation. So they met in group supervision to discuss the situation, with Josie being honest and encouraging, even enabling Linda to express her difficulties with Rochelle's ambulance and hospital situation. Gradually, the other supervisees joined in to share their dismay about the Rochelle thing, as they called it, hanging out there, unfinished and misunderstood. They all agreed that the discussion was very healing. Josie explained to them that she had been growing and learning as a supervisor by studying trauma-informed ways of thinking, and she would like to share this material with her supervisees as a way of helping them to work more effectively with their own clients. She also emphasized that professionals need to have a mindful self-care plan to get through the trauma of their difficult work. As you all know, the core of trauma-informed supervision or trauma-informed work is motivational interviewing. Over the course of several meetings, Josie discussed how the underpinning of trauma-informed work is motivational interviewing, which was designed to help people who are unmotivated or resistant to change. The spirit of motivational interviewing revolves around two things: voice and choice. Voice really relates to how we are listening to the voice of the supervisee or the client. Choice relates to how we are hearing the other person's perspective, how we are hearing and interpreting the other person's perspective. So in using motivational interviewing, we travel on 4 interlocking avenues. One is partnership. Don't be the expert, be the listener. 2 is evocation. Evoke responses and communication in the client or the supervisee. Often they come up with the best answers anyway. 3rd is acceptance. Respect the autonomy of the other person. 4, compassion. Caring about that person and how wrenching it can be to change. Using motivational interviewing means we practice skills in these elements, as Josie explained to her group. This is the OARS model. O, you ask open questions, not yes and no questions. A, use affirmations, which are positive statements. R, make reflections. Make sure you understand the meaning. S means use summaries, what you have discussed, and be sure to reflect what the other person's reasoning is. So open questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. The supervisory group also explored how shaming people can destroy their motivation and creativity, and that it can really prevent them from making change. Too much shame and blame, Josie said, doesn't help us reach our goal. They talked extensively about how each supervisee views motivation and their beliefs about how people change. Often, because change is hard, it triggers ambivalence, which leads to procrastination. Professionals may mistake ambivalence for resistance and procrastination for laziness. Josie warned her supervisees about applying blame to people for the ambivalence they feel around change. Even when they want the change, it's just tough. Remember that the point of motivational interviewing is to enable people to change, and supervisees need to understand that that's a complicated process to make a change. You might even want to talk to your supervisees about times they've had to make big changes in their lives and what that meant. Motivational interviewing is not static. It ebbs and flows. Motivation ebbs and flows. We listen to understand, not respond to that moving target. Boy, that's hard to learn, because we want to respond and say, well, why don't you do this and so? When in fact, we have to let the client or the supervisee come to that realization on her own. Now, Josie talked to her supervisees about elements which affect trauma-informed work. One is compassion fatigue. As helping professionals, we all enjoy the sense of compassion satisfaction when we get the gratification of knowing that we did something that actually helped the client and the client appreciates it. That doesn't always happen in an orderly fashion, does it? But sometimes we feel compassion fatigue. We've heard so many bad stories, and we've had so many clients or supervisees with problems that seem crushing that we start feeling the work is very difficult. Maybe it's even hopeless. It's just not going to work out that I can be able to help any of my clients to achieve the change that they need. When the helper incorporates the stress and difficulties of the client's world, it can become vicarious traumatization. As I said before, that unfolds over time, and it results in real psychological, physical, even spiritual changes in the professional. And the professional remains committed to helping, but they don't seem to know how to get through the morass of the trauma that's pressing on them. Now, traumatization like this can lead to burnout, which is the exhaustion and draining generated by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. The professional may become very defensive about the work and may exhibit responses like frustration, weariness, and depression that emerge over time and do not reflect the professional's typical persona. Another element that contributes to boredom, to professional fatigue and traumatization is boredom. So when you see a supervisee, is saying kind of bored with the work, maybe you need to develop some more challenges. And one of the best challenges we can have is to learn something new. When one professional is exposed to a discomforting situation, it can often lead to the contagion of other professionals in the work arena. Contagion is more likely to spread when the organization discourages professionals from revealing their feelings and their vulnerability. When the organizational culture encourages professionals to deny their responses and feelings, it promotes contagion among other professionals. Consequently, agencies may try to incorporate principles of crisis intervention and create traumatic event debriefing, where supervisors can help professionals to look at the facts of the event, explore their emotional responses, and develop strategies to reduce the harm of the event. This approach flourishes in the context of the strengths perspective. Experts also talk about compassion resilience. This is the process of learning about overcoming adversity from the trauma that survivors experience when we're working with them. Resilience is a complex topic. It's not easy, but when we try to center on strategies that help us be resilient from trauma, it helps us to stabilize ourselves and get our feet on the ground again. It helps us to keep healthy attitudes while coping with difficult and changing work situations. Appropriate supervision certainly helps professionals develop this resilience, which is all based in the idea of, this may sound corny, but looking at the bright side. What can you see that's positive about this? Or if you can't see anything positive, can you imagine something positive down the line that will occur because of this event? One way to help supervise ease, develop resilience, is to frame your discussion in terms of strengths and solutions. Avoid directives, replacing them with observations. Phrases like, "It is interesting that the client seems to be asking for yada yada," or "What do you make of that?" In other words, avoid judging and handing down directives, but rather observe with the supervisee, and together will emerge a response that makes some sense. Provide positive evaluations of the professional and teach curiosity. I'm sure you had a good reason for doing this. Or what do you think the client really wants from you? Those kinds of curiosities will help supervisees to think more deeply. Model constructive dialogue rather than definitive dialogue. What do you suppose they mean when they say thus and so? Or it's not unusual for clients to thus and so. In other words, try to make it a dialogue. And you can use scaling and relationship questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, how safe is this client now? Or what would this client say about her level of comfort with you? These are important elements. On her door, Josie posted this statement from Viktor Frankl: "What is to give light must endure burning." As social workers and mental health professionals, we have to understand it's going to hurt. It's a tough profession. What is to give light must endure burning. She also put up a sign that said, "Trauma care is about living effectively in the present and the future while understanding and managing the impact of the past." So people bring with them their past experiences, but your role as the social worker is to help them look forward. And as Josie always said, to blame and to shame gets us nowhere. Josie committed herself anew to helping her supervisors focus on the professional purpose, using purpose like a compass to help them stay on task and focused on the ultimate goal of recognizing the connection between trauma and symptoms and helping people to move forward in managing those symptoms. Josie explained that trauma care is not trauma therapy. It's really about living effectively in the present and the future while understanding and managing the impact of the past. Josie was meeting with a peer support group talking about her experiences with her supervisory group. One of her colleagues said to Josie, "The most important thing any of us can bring to supervision is our individuality. You have identified a problem and you have dealt with it creatively, honestly, and with regard for your supervisees. I think you've handled the situation very well. As you consider Josie's behavior in this matter, you see she made some big mistakes. So I want to talk a little bit about making mistakes, because it's not a matter of if you will make a mistake, it is a matter of when you will make a mistake. So we have to prepare ourselves for mistakes and kind of practice out the behavior that we might exhibit when a mistake becomes apparent. When we make mistakes, we tend to react with shock. We distance ourselves. We feel numb, shame. We feel guilty and humiliated. It's awful. And then we get anger. We feel rage against everyone, ourselves, the people involved, anyone who knows about the situation. And then we feel terror, anxiety, dread, panic. What's going to happen to me in the aftermath of this mistake? In response to making mistakes, we can become belligerent and defensive, which is no good. We can become depressed and hopeless. That's no good. Or we can learn and grow by thinking through the situation and accepting personal responsibility. We can learn how to ameliorate the damage and avoid the mistake in the future. These are tough words to live by. The reality is we often may not recognize we've made a mistake or the extent of the mistake. And so we have to think futuristically about how it might harm somebody else. Josie was doing this. Josie, as a supervisor, tried to respond to her mistake in a positive manner. She had a moment of personal honesty when she identified and acknowledged her mistake. She got consultation from a group of trusted professional peers who gave her ideas about how to ameliorate the damage and change the trajectory of her supervisee's concerns. She studied her mistakes and looked to theoretical guidelines to help her devise solutions. Her response was to study and learn, and then acknowledge her mistakes to her supervisees, demonstrating honesty and transparency. She shared the information she had learned in her studies, doing so with a thoughtful series of presentations in group sessions. She managed her own emotional reactions. By taking these steps, Josie became a stronger supervisor, and she created more confidence and resilience in her supervisees. There's nothing easy about this, but it really can have a positive effect on supervision. Well, I suspect I haven't told you much that you didn't already know, but may I put it in a different format for you to think about. Let's talk for a minute about cultural differences. My friend from Mississippi knitted me this cross stitch. You can always tell a Texan, but you can't tell her much. How true. I'll tell you a story from my background. One of my children is Chinese. As I was walking her in her stroller down the street, I met a neighbor who was a very well-educated woman. The friend looked at my child and finally she said, what is she? And I assumed she meant what nationality. So I said, she's Chinese. Well, my friend inquired, are you going to have to learn to speak Chinese so that you can talk to her? I couldn't think of a response to that question. Language, of course, is learned. It's not inborn. And in point of fact, most of our traits that get caught up with cultural definitions are learned behaviors. I call this the context of life. We have a number of items here that would fill the context of your life, shape your life. Your age, the religion you were born into, and later on the religion that you adopt. Sexual orientation and identity, ethnicity, differing abilities, attitudes and values. There again, you get to thank your family of origin a lot for that one. And things like age and different abilities, you have no control over that many times, certainly not age. Family structure and child rearing practices, yes, that's seated in the bosom of the family. It's not something that you're responsible for. Housing, which is, of course, related to income. Social and economic class. Again, your family has created economic class, but may not be able to do much about it. It is, in fact, something that, to some extent, we inherit from our growing up family and our growing up neighborhood, and we learn things. Sometimes we maintain some of those social ideas down the line. Gender, again, something that you don't easily change, though it can be changed. Physical appearance, oh my. We can do things to change our physical appearance, but it's not easy. Language, accent, linguistic style. How do people talk? Occupation, education, the racial category to which you are assigned, health and mental health, geographic roots, and your place of residence. These are all issues that create the context of our lives, and they shape how life goes for us. We can alter them to some extent, and we can certainly change the way it shapes us. But in many ways, people are held responsible for things that they can't overcome. So, given the context of life, we need to talk with supervisees about what is your context of life? What are the things that influence you? What have you carried into adulthood that was from that family of origin that still is very meaningful to you, or maybe troublesome to you? Those conversations you need to have, but not all the time. However, be open to it. Certainly, as it affects client services and the work of a case, you will need to go into that area, that arena of, why are you making this decision about a client or this judgment about a client? Could that have come from your family of origin or your place of origin? And let's talk about it. So be available to discuss these cultural or contextual issues with your supervisees, but don't make it the center of supervision. The center of supervision is always protecting the public through providing ethical, efficient, legal services. So that is mighty important. Now, this charming lady riding on the back of a burro carriage is trying to understand Egyptian culture and found it quite challenging. We talk about cultural competence, which is a noble but unachievable goal. I mean, let's face it, we can hardly explain our own culture or understand our own culture very well, let alone the cultures of all the people that we work with. All we can do is struggle along to do the best that we can in dealing with cultural components. People talk about cultural competence, but I think that's a bit of a dream. We can achieve pieces of it, and we can always be learning and open to learning, but we never know it all. For one thing, there's just too much information about people in order to reach cultural competence. We would have to know about language, behavior, belief systems, policies, and the effect of policies on folks, and much more. How can we do that when we don't even really understand the effect of policies on us in our communities, let alone people in the next neighborhood over? So we have to take into account that there are definitely structural forces that shape people's experiences and opportunities. I can't repeat that enough. There are structural forces out there that do affect people's ability to understand their experience and to turn it into opportunities. It's just a complex and difficult world in which we live. But being competent about culture is about learning. It's about learned behavior. So the other problem with this is that it's all a moving target. Cultures change before our very eyes, and we don't understand it. I think in our modern world, we are seeing that play out in incredible evidence about how cultures are changing all the time. They go from one stance to another stance and maybe back to a previous value. They decide to engage in different activities, and we don't really even understand why, for ourselves or for them either. So I always say that we have to understand we're making a lot of these decisions about culture, race, and ethnicity out of social construct. It's not out of what we're born. Ethnicity, scholars agree, it's really a social construct. It's not a scientific construct. It's an assigned category. It is based on land of origin and kinship historically. What is your land of origin and what is your kinship pattern? That's really what ethnicity is. Well, we know now that that can be exhibited in many different ways, and it can change over time. Culture is a learned set of behaviors and attitudes. It's also not a scientific construct. It is a way we learn to think about our relationships with other people, what makes us proud, what we should be doing, how we should be learning, and so on. Race boils down to skin color. In fact, race is a relatively modern distinction. As we have become more mobile, we see a lot more of different races than people did in times past. They might not ever see a person of a certain color that was different from theirs or with different bone structure. And what we don't know and what we don't understand, we're generally frightened of. That's what prejudice is. Prejudice means that we prejudge, and we prejudge because it's easy. It's much more difficult to understand, really try to understand people in terms of ethnicity, culture, and race. In reality, the only race in the world is the human race, and we all belong to that. Genetically, we're about 98% the same, regardless of what racial category someone has put in us into. This is about assigning categories, and we honestly, I think, need to continue to say the only race I really belong to is the human race. And I want to make that one a better race. So these are issues that you'll want to talk about with your supervisees and how their ideas on ethnicity, culture, and race have evolved over time. One's worldview, professional discipline, and practice context affect how we define and struggle with the idea of trying to understand other people's culture and be accurate in that understanding. Cultural competence has been, that phrase has been criticized because it fails to take into account the structural forces in society that can make people vulnerable or lead them in different directions or shape their lives. Now, culture is an intimate partner of ethnicity, and it also is learned behavior. It's not a scientific construct. People don't adopt behaviors or values based on genetics. Our genes don't tell us anything about that. Rather, we learn cultural elements from the people around us. Ancient people really used the idea of kinship, language, land, descent. Those were the issues that really defined identity of a person. Language, land, and descent. Who's your people? Who's your mom and dad? These are the things that ancient people used to define some kind of identity. And in ancient days, they really didn't refer to skin color or even so much to religion as we do now. That's why race is, the concept of race is sort of a modern thing that is growing increasingly important, but it's also increasingly confusing. It's very difficult, particularly as we come up with genetic tests that can show us what percentage of our forebears came from another country. It's amazing what people are finding out about their forebears and what they're a mixture of. So it's a fascinating thing to talk with supervisees about how their own view of themselves affects their clients. There's another way of defining people, and that's to use the other viewpoint. That's in quotations. This says that the other is so different from you, that the other is entirely unintelligible, unknowable, and it will remain forever so. And that means when you've got a view of the other, you have no hope of ever understanding that person and where they come from and what they're thinking. To me, this is useful, particularly at this point in the life of our country, when we're very divided and we categorize people politically, religiously, racially. It's a tragedy unfolding. And for some people, there are groups of the other that they think they will never understand, and so they never try to understand. When you dig into this kind of construct with your supervisee, it may be interesting what they say. Are there people that they feel like they can never understand? I know I've heard students say, I will never understand the homosexuals. How can people do that? And they've really placed those individuals into a box that says, don't bother. You're never going to understand these people. So the other viewpoint is a real difficult thing to get over. In our modern world, we really see a lot of examples of that. It might be, well, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, and I'll just never understand why you think the way that you do and why you have the values that you have. I think to some extent, we're seeing a lot of categorization of people into the other. And it really means that we've given up trying to understand. So we have to fight against that. On the other hand, there's the concept of cultural humility. This refers to maintaining an interpersonal stance that is open to others. It requires respect. If you don't respect others, you can't ever achieve real cultural humility about them and trying to determine what makes them tick and what's important about them and important to them. Cultural humility takes into account the fluidity of culture, and it challenges individuals and institutions to address inequalities. Let's talk for a minute about fluidity of culture. Recently, I went to a museum exhibit about Motown music, and the people who accomplished that kind of music are now, considered maybe old-fashioned. And we have people of the same race who are now into rap. Culture is fluid. And things change. They do not stay the same for any of us. So we move on, but we always want to understand that institutions can affect how people develop and operate, and that there are inequalities as a result. Cultural humility acknowledges that there are different power differentials between the provider and the client, or the supervisor and the supervisee. It challenges institutional barriers and makes partnerships with advocates. It does require personal accountability. If you see an inequality, then you need to do something about it. Understanding culture is only as powerful as the actions that flow out of that understanding. Well, let's look at another case. This is the case of Jordan Fitzpalone. Jordan is an MSW second-year student. His supervisor is Trent. Jordan has been assigned to work with Patrick, a 16-year-old client in this agency, which is a residential treatment center. Now, Patrick has serious mental and emotional disorders. He is really has had a lot of difficulty. Jordan is working with him in his field placement. He's placed in this agency that provides 24-hour care for emotionally and mentally disturbed children. His supervisor, Trent, has been employed at the facility for 2 years. Both Jordan and Trent are categorized as white. Jordan has been working with Patrick, who's, as I said, a 16-year-old with persistent mental and emotional disorders. Lately, Patrick, who is characterized as Black, has been more controlled in his behavior. And Trent determined that Patrick was well enough to go home for a weekend furlough. Patrick's parents are devoted to their son, but they have been financially, emotionally, and physically overwhelmed by Patrick's problems. Jordan spends time working with Patrick to develop a plan for his furlough and a plan for him to follow should he have problems at home. Jordan is committed to working with this teen, even though Jordan doesn't really understand Patrick very well. Jordan himself grew up in a lucky family where money was abundant and solved all of the problems. He has certainly been around Black youth, but he's somewhat taken aback by Patrick's speech patterns and choice of clothing and his behaviors. And Patrick's parents, Jordan thinks, could do more for the teen. They could try a little harder. Jordan's a little ashamed of having these thoughts, and he hasn't addressed them with Trent because he's afraid of being criticized for having prejudice. Patrick goes home for the furlough. The next day, his parents call Trent, frantic with pain and horror. Trent sets up an immediate Zoom meeting and includes Jordan. Patrick's parents report that they went out to dinner the night before, leaving Patrick alone on his first night at home. When they arrived back home, Patrick had taken a knife and cut himself grievously, saying that his brain told him to do it. The parents described coming home to a kitchen full of blood and gore and a butchered body part. Patrick is now in the hospital in a guarded condition, and the parents are beside themselves. Jordan looks to Trent for guidance. Trent, however, has blanched. He became suddenly ill and streaks out of the office, leaving Jordan alone on the Zoom call with the parents. Jordan was terrified about how to address this dreadful problem with Patrick's parents. He tries hard to refocus his brain, reining in his emotions. Stumblingly, Jordan begins to express his deep sorrow that this has happened. And he moves on to try to help the parents determine what their next steps should be. He wanted to scream at them. Why did you leave this kid alone on his first night back home? But he bites back the accusations that he wants to hurl at them. He considers them in this moment to be completely inadequate parents. Trent never returns to the meeting, and Jordan's memory of the meeting is a little bit jumbled. Jordan, however, was able to document the meeting's discussion and what the parents decided to do. He's wondering if the agency has liability for approving the visit, and he knows he must report it to the agency director, who is Trent's supervisor. The secretary reports that Trent has left for the day. Jordan consequently makes the report solo to the agency executive, who is horrified and quickly calls the board president and the board attorney. Jordan is left to figure out why Trent abandoned him in this distressing situation. Sure, he reasoned, Trent is human and he got sick when he heard this awful story. Jordan felt queasy himself. But Jordan thought Trent didn't act like a self-controlled supervisor in that meeting. The next day, Jordan went into Trent to report on how the interview had gone and to tell Trent that he had gone to the agency director about the situation. Jordan also explained that he felt badly abandoned and he was angry. Trent began to cry, responding that he knew he had left his emotions get the better of him and take over his brain in the meeting. He fumbled for words, but finally said he was horrified and guilty that he had let Patrick go home. Trent admitted that he had a sensation that Patrick maybe wasn't really worth the effort to treat. He was just so difficult. And Trent now believed he had discounted Patrick. He felt terribly guilty about letting the child go home. So Trent was experiencing a bad episode of vicarious traumatization. Later that day, Trent signed himself up for weekly supervision sessions with an experienced supervisor who could help him achieve more control and more competence as a supervisor. Jordan continued in the field placement, though he had thought about leaving, till the end of the semester, but he watched Trent carefully. He saw that Trent was a little more confident as a supervisor and was more humble in how he considered problems like Patrick experienced. Jordan and Trent talked a lot about guilt and responsibility and what it meant to respect and take care of your clients. Jordan also became more committed to learning the culture of families like Patrick's family. And he also became more humble in his assessment of himself in relationship to people who have different backgrounds than he has. Jordan and Trent spent a lot of time discussing cultural humility and how subtle understanding another person's culture can actually be. Together, they worked with the agency to develop a strong policy about when and how to extend a furlough to residents and how to prepare families for possible furlough behavior. So these two young social workers turned their attention toward understanding this client who was different from them and similar kinds of clients. And then they used that understanding to turn it into action. They took some concrete action that they thought would better protect the next Patrick in their lives. So it was a very traumatic and difficult experience, but they both learned from the experience to be humble, to be willing to learn, to be open to learning, and then to think about ways they could take action to make sure that inequitable situations are addressed. I ran across an article in the New York Times that I wanted to bring to your knowledge. This is by Charlie Warzel, and it's Don't Go Down That Rabbit Hole. The reason I bring this up is that I think we need real help as supervisors and supervisees to hone our critical thinking skills, particularly in terms of culture, understanding culture, ethnicity, race, and these issues. Misinformation rides the rails through social media, and it's very hard to combat. We actually have what this author called an internet hellscape. And much of this misinformation is aimed at people and their cultures. It's aimed at criticizing people, devastating people, saying certain people should be executed or otherwise punished for who they are and what they believe. Now, sometimes we think we can undermine or we can determine, if information is true or false by digging into it deeply. But actually, the best way to determine the believability of information is to leave it and look elsewhere. Your handy dandy librarian can help you do this because they've been preaching lateral reading for a long time. And that's what they mean by that is reading across sources rather than giving a great deal of attention to just one source. Remember, propaganda is put together by people who are way better at propaganda than you are. So if you're into a propaganda cesspool of an article or a social media screed, leave it. Look for other sources. When you stay focused on information that may or may not be true, you give the authors one of your most precious and finite resources, your attention, your time. And the goal of disinformation is to capture your attention. Now, when you do critical thinking, you are giving it deep attention, and we would do that if we were researching a certain area as more than a casual observer. Critical thinking has to do with focusing on something and contemplating it deeply. So let's say that you go into a website called South Fork. I just made that up. And it's a website that talks about white supremacy. And the reason you want to go read that is you want to find out how white supremacists think, because you have a client that you think may adhere toward white supremacy tenets. When you get in there, you suspect that this is not accurate, and you decide to go do lateral reading, and instead you go find a more reputable resource, which might be, for instance, the Southern Poverty Law Center and their website that talks about extremist groups. So you do lateral reading for, this means that you don't give your attention to what was really a bad actor. On the South Fork website, let's say, there was a story about how Robert Kennedy was a white supremacist. You find that hard to believe. And so you go back to the source that the website quoted, and you find that there was a statement taken completely out of context that Robert Kennedy made, and that he really wasn't a white supremacist. So what authorities have come up with is the Sift method that can help you in these situations. The first step is stop. The second step is the I, that's investigate the source. The third step is to find better coverage. And the fourth step is to look at the claims, the quotes, and the media in its original context, because it's often so misquoted online. In this way, you stop giving your attention to the bad actors. Your attention and your time, it's finite, and you need to store it up to do good rather than bad. And we need to find ways of getting the best information about these complex issues around race and culture and ethnicity. So I recommend this Sift method to you. It's a good one to share with your supervisees and maybe do some practice on that. The Sift method calls for us to make quick fact checks, and that's really for us as casual news consumers. And we really, in many cases with our clients, we don't need more than casual familiarity with what they're talking about, because we're not there to change their minds. We're there to help them change themselves. So if you're really trying to do an expert search, you will have to go into deep diving. The important thing is that we avoid uncritical acceptance of an idea or a news piece just because it agrees with our preformed ideas. And we also uncritically reject ideas that differ from our preconceived notions. That is what you call prejudice, folks. It's the issue of prejudging. And we have to train ourselves to focus our attention on the truth and to speak the truth. So find more reliable sources. We can't really mend our severely broken information system to think we can do that alone or in a cavalier way is not appropriate. So we need to check multiple sources, trying to find better, more reliable sources, and really be sure that we're getting a clear information about people and their culture. This brings us to the idea of online boundaries. I love this cartoon. I am a grandma, and I have had a grandchild say to me, well, look, you just do this, just do this. And I don't have any idea of what they're talking about because they're familiar with the computer, and I'm not so much. They grew up with it. And I said the other day, it's really discouraging when your 10-year-old grandchild is telling you how to do your business like a Zoom meeting online. But that's the way it is. It's definitely a generational problem, but it's more than a generational problem. I would encourage you to go to this website and find this write-up of the 3-year study that was done on the ethics of online work by Association of Social Work Boards, National Association of Social Workers, the Canadian Association of Social Workers, and the Council of Social Work Education. It is a really good, solid beginning of how to handle online work. You know, we're all doing more online work. We have to, given our current situation, it is not an option. So we have to learn to do it correctly. I'm going to summarize some of the material that's in this report. Both the supervisor and the supervisee must be willing to learn about technology. And that's not always easy, particularly for people who are unfamiliar with the technology. And it can be a generational thing. It can also be a poverty issue where people haven't been around the technology enough to understand it. We also have to have the appropriate computer equipment and the supportive infrastructure to work online appropriately. And that can cost money. So money is definitely an issue that we have to consider as we look at online work. We also have to look at our communication skills, basic typing and spelling skills. Oh my goodness. I had a message from a supervisor the other day that was so filled with misspellings and incorrect use of words. Actually, I couldn't figure out what she was asking. I thought, woo, I hope she's not relating to her supervisees in this way. Everybody can learn basic communication. We can always improve basic communication. Every one of us, no matter how good we are at it, we can always improve. And that's what we need to require supervisees to do. They need to develop strong communication skills, both online and face-to-face. But online, they need to be able to spell and to write understandable sentences. And they need to have good judgment about how to communicate clearly. I will never forget, as a young supervisor, we had a case in which a child was removed from parents because of really psychotic behavior that she was exposed to and was not responding well. So we had her in a substitute home. The worker who was handling this case, she didn't really write very well. She was smart, it wasn't that. She just didn't discipline herself and think about how it read. So her notes on this case would be things like, and then she said that he had done, and they, a whole lot of pronouns that were not understandable. Avoid pronouns as much as you can. Clarify who the actors are. And then read your material to see, does it really clearly communicate what you mean? Are the dates correct? Is it set in context correctly? That's what we mean about having good judgment about clearly communicating. We need to work with supervisees a lot. In my case, the supervisee did not come to court, and I had to testify as her supervisor to court from the record. And I read what was in the record. Finally, the judge threw his pen on the bench and said, "Stop. I'm putting this child back with her parents because y'all don't make any sense. This makes no sense." And because of our lack of discipline about clear communication, that child went back into a very dangerous situation. So, encourage your supervisees to have good judgment. Make sure that your supervisees know that online sessions may be longer than face-to-face because people get to talking and it may just go over time. Remember that emails and other electronic communications create a record that may outlive you. It can affect the individuals involved for years to come. As a board member, I was amazed, and I saw this increase over the years as email and texting and tweeting and the rest of it all became more popular, that by the time I had my last hearing, I saw that emails and other electronic social media communication made up a great deal of the evidence in almost every case of ethical misbehavior that we heard. This stuff hangs around. I don't care if you delete it, it is somewhere. And somebody can pull it up. Be ever so careful what you commit to writing. If you have any question about whether it could create a problem in writing, then pick up the phone and call instead. These permanent records can affect the client forever. And it certainly can affect us as professionals. It can affect how well we do in our careers. You also need to have support, technical support, maybe even more than your grandchildren, which is usually my technical support. Realize that people can make meaningful relationships online. But the nature of those relationships is somewhat different from face-to-face relationships. We can see each other, but not the whole body movement thing ordinarily. So it becomes important to realize that the relationship is genuine, but it might not have as much depth as a face-to-face relationship. It depends on how it's done. Let's talk about online supervision. A benefit is that online supervision is flexible, accessible. It overcomes barriers of time and space. In a state like Texas, where an individual might have to drive 2 hours one way to reach a board certified supervisor, that's a lot of time. And so online supervision can help us to save time and create safety for people not out on the roads. It provides a mechanism to clearly outline the goals and expectations of supervision. We can also collaborate with consultants and pull them into the Zoom meeting so that they can help us to come up with strategies in troublesome cases. Online creates a permanent record of supervision while the supervision is occurring. It provides avenues of expression that are sometimes less threatening than face-to-face meetings. Sometimes people feel the shelter of a computer rather than having to breathe the same air as you do. It allows rural and remote professionals to more easily engage in supervision, and it may help to alleviate their sense of anxiety. And the same is true not only for rural and remote professionals, but maybe professionals in ethnic communities within large cities who also may feel isolated. It allows participants to talk with and learn from professionals around the world, and that can be a wonderful experience. It can save money and time on travel, though you're spending money and time on the computer and learning it and operating it and keeping it in good shape. And it can allow creative ways to initiate and respond to certain topics. But using technology raises issues, and some of these we haven't even really thought about very clearly. Our codes of ethics are out of date because life has been so changed by technology. And that's why you need to go read these expectations for ethical boundaries in working online. For instance, a client or a supervisee might Google you prior to meeting you. Are they going to get accurate information? Well, I don't know. Are they going to tell you about it? Can you Google clients or supervisees before meeting them? Yes, of course you can, but only if it's done in the best interest of that party, that you're really trying to do something that will help that individual. Pardon me while I take a sip. If a client is homicidal or suicidal, that client may not be a good choice for online work. I myself know of a couple of situations where a mental health professional met online with suicidal individuals who did, in fact, take their own lives. They really needed a lot more help than they could get online. It's easy for clients and supervisees to think that online work means you're available 24/7. Don't let yourself fall into that trap. It's a matter of protecting yourself, but it's also a matter of avoiding boundary violations. If you have a supervisee that contacts you at a late hour, it may look as if they feel they have access to you anytime, anywhere. You don't want to let that thinking happen. So I always say you should have set hours for email communication or other kinds of communication that you may use with a supervisee. You need to think about that. Make some boundaries, some fences for yourself. That protects your mental health, but it also protects you from maybe some thinking that you're willing to violate boundaries. You may also want to look at your online presence, your personal online presence, and make sure that you have an alternate name for that online presence than you do for your work presence. In other words, something very different from your professional name, so that it's not easy for clients to find your stuff and get onto your face. It's just a consideration, but think about that. Assess whether electronic communication is appropriate and whether it's advisable to have any face-to-face contacts. The Texas board definitely believes that if you're going to supervise online, you should have at least one face-to-face meeting to begin that process so that you do have a sense of who this person is in more than just on the screen. So, yeah, you need to go through an assessment process. Is this electronic communication the best for this client or this supervisee? You want to look at, in terms of a client, the age of consent and the willingness to consent. You would want to look at clinical and diagnostic issues, technological skills, different abilities, language skills and literacy, cultural issues, safety issues. Are they going to be in danger of somebody mugging them, stealing from them the computer that they're using with you? Do they have the language skills that you would need to make written communication? Let's talk for a minute about your online presence. If you have a website that advertises your supervision practice or any other independent practice that you might have, you need to make sure that you're not soliciting or using testimonials from clients or even from supervisees, because that really is a boundary violation. It gives out names, or could be, unless you guard the names and de-identified the names, that could happen. So it's just not a good thing to do. We'll talk about this more in a minute, but make sure that if you have your own personal website, it is accurate and legal. And suppose Joe has a website as part of his private practice, and he says on this that he has a PhD in sex counseling. And come to find out, it's from a university in Taiwan that takes 6 weeks to finish the quote PhD, unquote. Well, states, including Texas, will look at that, and they have quite a few, like thousands of names on their list of universities that are not accredited and are not acceptable. And it is unlawful then to use those university credentials in advertising because it's not accepted by the state. And they didn't accept the Taiwan College of Sex Education that took 6 weeks. So you put yourself in jeopardy if you say something on your website that is not true or is illegal. Watch that. Make sure that your website is really pristine. Don't accept a friend situation or some contact or blog requests from clients. And I would extend that to say, probably you shouldn't do that with supervisees either. You should be very careful about that. There are certainly agencies and individual practitioners who have documents that they give to clients, new clients or new supervisees, about when I'm available for electronic contact and what kind of contact, and to say that I will never be a friend of yours on Facebook, not because I don't care about you, but because that's inappropriate for me as a professional. An individual mental health professional, for instance, was writing a blog about her divorce, how she got through her divorce. And that was open to her supervisees and clients. It's inappropriate. It's sharing too much information. And it is bound to raise the specter of crossed boundaries. Document all your contacts with and services that you provide to clients using technology, and inform clients that you're recording these contacts and you're keeping track of them. Confidentiality, boy, that's the biggest bugaboo about electronic work. Safeguard your computer. Use passwords, encryption, firewalls, get expert help on that. It's really important. We had an individual who came before the board self-reporting. She kept all of her client records on the computer. Someone had hacked her computer with a worm that would take pieces of documents, Word documents, and send them out as emails. She had no idea if her contacts or her records had been compromised, and if so, who was now reading pieces of those records. You don't want to be in that situation. It wasn't her fault, and nothing was done to her, but she still was in a very compromised position because she couldn't be sure that she had protected client confidentiality. So do everything you can to make sure that your machine is safe and that your supervisee's machine is safe. Make sure that your computer is not visible to people walking by, kids in the family, friends of kids in the family, janitors, co-workers. There's a list of people that can walk by and see the computer screen, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen because those records are private. And when you are supervisors and supervisees are talking about cases, remember that all supervision is case-based. So you can't supervise somebody without knowing about the cases that they're engaged in. But you may be able to protect the information by not using clearly identified issues such as names and details of clients' information. Remember, you really have to take this into account because it's so important that you protect client information. You might want to create a code for each client so that the names are hidden. And just take care of trying to shield clients and supervisees from any kind of breach of confidentiality over the electronic world. Obviously, we have to have express consent if we're going to record or share anything about another party, be it a supervisee or a client. And you don't ever want to forward communication or video streams from clients or supervisees to someone without informed consent. And remember, informed consent has both got to be informed. This is why I'm doing this or want to do this. And consent. Do you understand? Can you understand? If you don't understand, who is the responsible party that can sign in your stead? So it has to be both consent and informed. Make sure you and the supervisee have made a pact about how you're going to share electronic communication, how you're going to store it. So I personally use a detachable device that stores the information, and I try not to share anything identifiable on my actual computer because that could easily be stolen. If your system breaks down or it's illegally accessed, make sure that you notify the client and any other party in accordance with local, state, and federal laws, because that's a serious breach. If you have a breach of confidentiality, it's really serious. So make sure that you're protecting yourself and your supervisees. Professionals should participate in online services only after they've been properly trained in how to use technological communication effectively and ethically. And that, of course, includes handling confidential records. We should know about privacy settings in social media and the limits to privacy and privacy protections. Hopefully, you're not going to be engaging in activities on social media around clients. It's just too full of holes. It's too liable to give rise to information that's inaccurate or dangerous. I always say too that you should not have photos of your kids that are clearly identifiable on your Facebook if it's open to the public. Protect your family, and putting them out there for the world to see on social media is not very protective. Ask yourself when you post information whether you'd be comfortable with a client seeing that information. Would that be a good thing? That's part of the judgment of developing good communications online. Think through who could see this and how could it be interpreted. Consider using a management platform. There are a lot of platforms available out there. Simply Notes is one that I've heard of that is good, but there are a number of those kinds of platforms that will help you organize your work. Make sure that it's HIPAA compliant, and they will tell you that whether it is or not. Then you want to make sure that you explore the services that it may offer you. Things like keeping track of client contacts or fees that you charge, those kinds of things. It can be helpful. Have a policy on confidentiality and share it. This is true with clients or supervisees. It's always good with supervisees to talk confidentiality and have it in writing. Talk about what's going to happen if we have a technical glitch and how we're going to respond to a suspected breach. Those are important issues. Don't communicate with clients over social media or electronic outlets unless it's really necessary. It has to be with the client's consent, and it has to be for professional purposes. Discuss together with your supervisees those boundary-related concerns, like policies about contacts for unscheduled appointments, emergency coverage, and the professional's vacation or non-working hours. I dealt with a mental health professional, was dealing with a very, very sick client who had mental health problems to beat the band. And this social worker became so involved with the client and so tender toward the client. She informed the client of where she, the social worker, could be reached at any time, on vacation, on holidays, on weekends. She was always trying to be available. There were major boundary problems in that case, and a part of it was that 24/7 availability. Keep your business and personal websites separate. Understand that social networks often attract people who have similar occupations or interests or live in the same area. And there also are going to be links between people based on cultural groups like substance abusers or sexual abuse survivors, those kinds of things. And this can really create boundary dilemmas that you have to work out. Think proactively. What could happen? You may think that's buying the worst outcome, but if you will think about it proactively, you'll be surprised how often it keeps you out of trouble. Make separate personal and work cell phones. You may jump all over me, but I say wear appropriate professional clothing and look tidy. Online, if you want to wear a nice shirt with a blazer and your pajama bottoms, that's great with me because you're not going to see the pajama bottoms. But this is how I really believe and have always taught students. If you're going to home visit, to the shabbiest house in town, you still need to dress in a way that says to the client, I respect you. I haven't come to your house in my workout clothes. I have come in something that it certainly can be serviceable, and it can be something you can run away in if you have to, but something that looks professional and that expresses respect for people. The same should be true in our electronic communications, that we say to people by our appearance and our tidiness that we respect them. Make sure that what your camera reveals is not distracting or reveals more personal information than you're comfortable with revealing. You have a right to privacy as well as the supervisee. So no cell phones visible or turned on, no photos, no recording, no messaging, no posting of photos or information on social media. And you really need to make sure that members of a supervision group understand these things. Be sure that you go to reputable sources if you're going to try to find something out, say about a client who says, I have certain disease, and you want to find out more about that. The internet is often wrong on these matters, just the general internet, but you might go to the Mayo Clinic for your information in that case. Try to find reliable sources. Don't post information about a client or about a supervisee. Check your own website, monitor it, make sure that it's correct and honest. If you can Google yourself often, you'll find that sometimes the information about you is not correct and you need to correct it. Separate your private postings from your professional sites. They will outlive you. If you see unethical online behavior, report it as appropriate. Don't copy people on emails unless really necessary, and don't respond to email lists unless it's really necessary. I've made that mistake before. Clients and supervisees may use technology differently according to their cultures, so be aware of the linguistic and environmental issues around how individuals use technology. Explain to clients the potential benefits and risk of offering services online using culturally appropriate and understandable language. I'm thinking, for instance, in the era of the pandemic, children were learning on computers about school work. Parents were working from home on computers. And there are certainly many cases in which there wasn't enough computer. They only had the one. And there wasn't enough computer time to go around for anybody to do any good. And that's an issue that you have to take into account with clients. Will they have the computer access that they need to actually get with you on a timely basis? And obviously, informed consent for any recorded or screening services that come online. Take responsible steps to verify the identity and location of online clients, like asking for scanned copies of government-issued identification. I'm sure that there are a lot of ways to do this, but you would need to educate yourself on that. Consider how you would respond when a client or a supervisee reveals that he's learned information about you online. For instance, oh, I saw online that your kid was playing soccer in Hill Park. So now he knows what your child looks like, he knows where he plays soccer, and you have to respond to that. You have to think through how can I protect all parties. In group online sessions, you have to ensure that clients or supervisees know that you can't really guarantee confidentiality. Everybody can take a pledge and sign a pledge, but that doesn't mean that you can be responsible for what Joe will say to Sally on the outside. Make sure that your clients know they're not to disclose electronic communications from the professional. Make sure clients know how records are secured and how long they're retained, and the policies about sharing records with third parties. Clients have a right to what's in their records, and doing online work, this can be an electronic record, and they may have the right to demand that based on prevailing legal standards. Never harass, bully, or defame your colleagues online. Online communication is the worst place to have a fight. So just avoid it and treat people well. It will pay off. Don't post private information about colleagues without their consent, including messages, photographs, or videos. Don't use technology to present the work of other people as if it's your own. Know and comply with all laws regarding electronic communication and services. Let's talk about a case we have here. This involves Judy, LCSW, who's the supervisor, Chloe, who's the supervisee, and Violet, the client. Judy has supervised Chloe on Zoom for 8 months. Chloe was a social worker in victims services. That's her job. Judy was concerned about Chloe's performance and didn't think it was too great. Chloe had posted a blog on how I survived my divorce, which was very revealing, and Chloe didn't seem to have a very good understanding of emotional or boundary issues. Judy, the supervisor, was really distracted by Chloe's placement of her computer in her bedroom, revealing personal items. Often Chloe appeared on camera in an untidy, unprofessional manner, and she didn't seem to take supervision very seriously. And it really bothered Judy having this window into her supervisee's bedroom. Chloe talked a lot about one of her online clients, Violet, who was a crime victim. Online Violet often obscured her face with her cat. She would hold the cat up in front of the face. Chloe proudly told Judy that she responded to Violet's cat shield by Chloe putting her face up to the camera so that Violet could only see her eyeballs. Later, Chloe stated that Violet had declared that she was romantically attracted to Chloe. Why didn't you tell me that happened? Judy said in shock. Goodness, didn't you think that was serious? Well, Chloe finally admitted that she was flattered by Violet's comments. They had actually shared on Zoom some meals together and talked like friends, but the two had never met face to face. Judy was dumbstruck. She knew nothing about this. Later, she called a supervisor that she trusted to discuss this situation and plan out next steps. Judy decided to have Chloe give a written timeline of events and how the relationship progressed from a superficially professional one to a personal one. Judy decided to keep working with Chloe, though she had thought about ending supervision with Chloe. She developed a curriculum to use with Chloe on boundaries using reputable books and case studies. She sent Chloe to a seminar about online boundaries. She requested to see Chloe's recordings on her work with other clients. Judy required that Chloe discharge Violet from services since they were no longer working on mental health issues, but instead were having supper and shooting the breeze together. Judy decided not to report Chloe's behavior, though she found this decision to be very hard to make. And I think it's quite debatable whether she should have reported Chloe or not. The issue is Chloe took an easy path off of electronic services into an electronic friend relationship. And that's a definite boundary issue. So there's a lot here in this case that you could think about and what would be the best thing to do. Chloe, back to the bedroom, the camera into the bedroom. Chloe said, well, I'm too crowded. I have to, that's the only place I can really have my computer. And they didn't ever seem to be able to come up with another strategy, such as maybe some kind of a separation, or at the least picking up personal items that would then be on camera. Think about what your camera view looks like. And you don't want it to be too revealing. Actually, one of the nice things about serving people on line is the fact that, for instance, if you're serving a family, you can see something about their home and how they live. It does reveal some information there you might not have ever gotten to if you were meeting with them in the office. So the online can be helpful. On the other hand, you, as the person responsible for setting the standards, you want to be sure that you're setting a situation where people will not think that there's any boundary issue and won't get too much personal information. One of the things that I ran into recently was by the Zoom Corporation, and they encouraged people who are on Zoom meetings to look directly into the camera instead of at yourself, which is the normal thing to do. Eliminate the distractions and focus on the agenda. That means be aware of your setting, your audio and visual setting, and make sure that the place is quiet and that it's not too distracting for the other members of your Zoom meeting. And if you're the host of a Zoom meeting, stick around until everybody else leaves. I thought that was interesting. There are new rules on Texas supervision as of February 2021, and I'm just wanting to make sure that you know this. What this means is, as you undoubtedly know, the Texas Board of Social Work Examiners has moved under the Behavioral Health Executive Council. The board is still an independent decision-making board, but their rules, their decisions, and so on go to this BHEC, Behavioral Behavioral Health Executive Council. I always have to think through what that really means. And it has brought about some changes. This relocation started in September of 2020. And that's why now they're talking about council-approved supervisors, whereas we've always talked about board-approved supervisors. It's the same thing, but because they're under the council, they're now called council-approved supervisors. To be a supervisor, you must file an application and pay the applicable fee. You have to be licensed in good standing by the council as an LBSW who would supervise people working toward an independent practice recognition on the BSW level, and LMSW who would be working with people seeking an independent practice recognition as an LMSW. An LCSW who can supervise anybody or be recognized as an advanced practitioner, LMSW, advanced practice. There are still LMSWs, LMSWAP individuals out there, but the board no longer grants that title. And to be a board-approved supervisor or council-approved supervisor, you must have worked at your category of licensure for 2 years. Now, there are changes in the rules, and to keep up with these, you have to go to the BHEC website, and it's not always user-friendly, but you have to keep up with these kind of on your own. So visit the site from time to time and see if you can find out what rules have been adopted. You can also go to the Secretary of State. Here's a huge change. No longer is the state going to expect pre-approval of a supervision plan in order to accrue supervised experience. That means that the supervisor and the supervisee will meet and agree on the nature of supervision and whether the experience that they're getting qualifies as truly clinical experience in the case of working toward an LCSW. And they will document that experience, but it won't be submitted until the individual is applying for the LCSW or the independent practice recognition. And the reason they're doing this is always when the board was with the Department of Health, they were underfunded and didn't have enough employees to do all the work. Then came the pandemic when what employees they had were off work for months and not necessarily issued access to state computers. So a terrible backlog occurred. And to resolve that, they've come up with this idea of supervisor and supervisee get together and determine supervision and experience, and they attest to it at the end of the supervision time, which is 2 years. Now, I have to say, and this is my personal opinion, it means that you as the supervisor have a much heavier burden to make sure that your supervisees are doing appropriate work and that you're acting correctly as a supervisor. We have supervisors out there in the world who might engage with a supervisee and say, pay me this amount of money and I will attest that you have completed the supervision successfully at the end of the 2 years, but we won't really have to meet, or we won't meet very often, or we will disregard all of the standards and the regulations for supervision. That could happen. And if it happens once, it's too many. It puts a really heavy burden on you to be ethical and careful and to make sure that your supervisee is ethical and careful. If they're not getting the correct clinical experience and they're working toward the LCSW, they may have a lot of trouble on the licensing test because they haven't had the experience to shore up the cognitive knowledge about clinical work. So I really encourage you to monitor yourself, monitor your supervisee. And if you see that it's not working, I hope that you will write to the BHEC and alert them, or talk to your legislator about trying to get the rules changed to be more standardized and more professional. So you don't any longer have to have pre-approval, and it's up to you to ensure that the experience that they're getting is clinical in nature if they're working for an LCSW. And it will be up to you to make sure that they have worked the requisite number of hours. Now it's up to the LMSW who's going into supervision. The supervisee has to make sure that you're a council-approved supervisor. And there's an online verification system that will help them find that out. It's under specialty fields. Here is the current board address. And I do encourage you to be lively engaged in the rules and regulations, procedures, to know and understand the rules. This is our profession. It's important that we protect the public and we enhance the profession. It's very important. So I encourage you to be involved as a supervisor with that process. Thank you so much for your attention. It's been great to share these things with you. I hope that you got some good nuggets of thought that might help you in your supervision practice. I've given you my Outlook address at dorinda.noble@outlook.com. And if you want another source, Will Francis of NASW Texas can be reached at wfrancis.naswtexas@socialworkers.org. I wish you the best of luck in your supervision practice. Let me know if you have questions or ideas. Thanks so much and good luck to you.